Hello and welcome to another episode of 177 Nations of Tasmania. And today I have a really interesting guest from Romania originally, Teodor Flonta. I've known Teodor for a very long time actually, and I think I might just tell a short personal anecdote about the first time I met Teodor when I was 11 years old, and my parents told me that we were going to be visited by a gentleman from Transylvania. Now, I'd never heard of Romania, but I had certainly heard of Transylvania, and I was incredibly excited to meet someone from there. And I think I remember the first thing you said, actually, Teodor, was look at my teeth. And I wasn't sure whether to take it too seriously at the time, but I learned that was just part of Teodor's sense of humour, actually. And so with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Teodor, who had a very interesting life and has written several books about his life in Romania, and I'd certainly recommend his book, A Luminous Future, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a minute. So I'll stop talking and I'll welcome Teodor, and I might just start with a very simple question of can you tell us what brought you to Tasmania, and when did you arrive, actually?
Oh, thank you so much, Mark. I loved your anecdote, but since we first met, my teeth have shortened, so you don't have to be afraid. And you are in my house. So in Transylvania, we look well after the guests.
Oh, that's good. I probably don't have the same imagination I did as when I was a child as well.
Yes. Well, it often happens to me, actually, when I talk to younger people. They can't locate Romania if I tell them I am from Romania. But as soon as I say Transylvania, they say, oh, I'm sure they think about the famous Dracula and so on, but yes, at least that "oh" comes out. So it's some sort of recognition, okay? Yeah. I left Romania, so to answer your question, it's a very long story, this one, but I'll try to be short. So I actually left Romania in January 1972. As you know, Ariella, she's Italian, so we married with great difficulty in Romania because Romanians shouldn't have had contacts, according to the law in Romania. Romania at that time shouldn't have had contacts with foreigners. Imagine with Westerners. That was forbidden, really. But we met. Perhaps the story, I will tell the story later. We met, we fell in love in Romania, and then I managed to go to Italy. And we lived in Italy for close to 7 years, had 2 boys whom you met, you know very well. And we all came to Australia in 1978. It was August, end of August. In Italy it was hot summer, but we landed in Adelaide. I mean, we came to Adelaide, so it wasn't a shock. Perhaps if we had come to Tasmania, August is still a cold month, yes. So coming from summer to winter.
Lupoaia, Transylvania, February 13, 1951. Sometime after midnight, a black windowless van with its lights extinguished stopped in front of our house. 4 men hurried out. 2 of them entered the courtyard and headed straight for the door, while the other 2 jumped over the fence. One stationed himself beside the back window of our bedroom on the garden side, and the other at the front window overlooking the road. When they were all in position, the first man tried the door handle. He turned out to the second man, shook his head, and peered through the window. Too dark to see inside, he shook his head again. The second man took a step forward and knocked on the door 3 times. "Flonta Pavel, open up," he commanded. They waited for half a minute. The man knocked louder. "Flonta Pavel, we know you are in there." I was asleep in the same room as my young parents. The loud knocks on the door woke me up, and as if having a bad dream, I started crying. Mama rushed over and took me in her arms. In the dark, I saw the shadow of my father grabbing clothes, opening the window and closing it again. "They are everywhere," he whispered. "God help us." Mama crossed herself. "Open immediately, otherwise we'll break down the door. We know you are in there, Flonta Pavel. We want to talk to you."
The first chapter of your book was really, I found, quite gripping because it describes, through a child's eyes, seeing your father arrested by the secret police?
A secret police which was called Securitate. It comes from security. They secured their own positions there. You see, the leaders of the Communist Party. So Securitate, that's how it was called. And it was dreadful, I was born in a very little village in Transylvania, located towards Hungary. The village is called Lupoaia, which translated into English would be the Valley of the Wolves. So it becomes some sort of predestined name to have it in a book, you see. And as I said, my parents were simple peasants. I mean, simple in the sense that not highly educated. And they had some sort of less than 10 acres of land. My father had, since a young man, had also something called initiative. He learned carpentry and he was very good at it. He, at a young age, went to Bucharest and worked with Italian architects. How about that? Yes.
And what era was that?
It was before the communists came, obviously, around 1940. He had, with his father, a little distillery built of copper, all right? And he started making this plum brandy, which is called Palinka in Romanian, and in Hungarian, the neighbors, they call Palinka. So when the communists took over, they actually took over in Romania in 1946. They won the elections by stealing the votes, going with Stalin's dictum, doesn't count for whom you vote. What counts is who count the votes. So he started working with this thing at a little distillery, and as soon as the communist regime came, he was declared Chiabur in Romanian, which means the old, taken from Russian, kulak. Perhaps you heard the word kulak. The rich peasants, no? Equivalent to the enemy of the people. And he had a terrible, hard life after that. Persecuted, incarcerated, tortured. And imagine that. He was the youngest so-called enemy of the people from my region, only 29 years old. And that, I'm quite emotional. Yeah. Sorry. What my father was guilty of was that he employed seasonally for 3 months, 2 months a year, 2 people. And that in the communist language is exploitation of man by man, right? So they said that these people, like my father, had either accept to be re-educated, that means saying yes sir all the time to what they asked, or destroyed, killed. Hence the torture, the imprisonment, the harassment, and that sort of thing. So, because communism, to many people, I mean, this communist ideology can appear, oh, nice, beautiful, let's all be equal, let's all be this and that. But it's all a lie.
The captain looked at him for a long minute. My father was expecting the worst when the captain called a young militiaman and had my father taken out of the room. Instead of going back to the basement, he was put in a solitary cell, a tiny cell, 1 meter by 1.5 meters. A light bulb hung from the ceiling at eye level, permanently on and blinding him. His only companion was a tub which served as a latrine. The walls dripped with water, while the floor grate, which cut into his feet, covered a stream of cold water. The overflowing latrine reeked, and a drop of water, made to fall onto his head at regular intervals, drove him mad. It was cold, so cold, and he was naked. He leaned his head against the wet wall to try to ease his agony. Unexpectedly, the door would open, and the guard would beat him severely, never allowing his bleeding to stop. Nights and days were identical. Then a guard opened a peephole. "Prisoner Flonta Pavel, turn your back to the door." My father started, thinking that he recognized that voice. He was almost sure of it. "Yes, sir," he obeyed. "Have you turned your back?" the guard asked. "Yes, I have." "Don't turn around. Cover your eyes." The guard handed him a cloth. My father couldn't resist. "I'll do whatever you say, Purdelea." He knew the man. He had sold him palinka now and then. The guard hit him with his gun on the back of the neck. "You don't know me, scum," he said in a harsh voice. "Oh yes, I know you too well, Purdelea," my father insisted. Another blow almost made him lose consciousness. "Keep your mouth shut," the guard said, kicking him with his hard boots. The harshest period of arrests and torturing happened prior to Stalin's death. It was between 1949 and 1953, really. My father was arrested several times, just for being labeled Kyabur, that is, the enemy of the people. So the communists always said they had to be liquidated, exterminated, they had to disappear. Now they let a little door open for those who would repent. They didn't know about what to repent, but those who collaborated with them and accepted to be re-educated, in other words, to say yes sir all the time, those were saved. Now my father never could do such a thing, but most of the time he was just shut up and do not make waves, so to speak. What helped him was also his youth. He had energy, and many times he ran away. The problem was that most of the time they would arrest people after midnight and take them straight from their beds. My father, having this palinka business, he used it to his advantage, and people would help him when they could. For example, our neighbor, who was in the war, the First World War, with my grandpa, would play the flute for him. He would play always the same melody when he would see the duba, which is the van, the Securitate van, coming for my father or entering the village. So he would play the flute, and we would all hear, and my father would run for his life and will manage to escape that way. So the first arrest, he was taken to town, to Oradea, and then placed into a basement with so many people there, where they had only a tub as a latrine, and they were sleeping on the floor, on cement, on concrete, and many people there had been tortured previously, and they were suffering.
Two of these people whom he knew, after the Securitate finished with them, they went home and committed suicide. They couldn't bear it anymore. They were old people. So many times he would be arrested for 2 to 3 days at the village hall with other Kiabur, other enemies of the people, and they'll be shut into a room there without food and water. My mother and I would sneak in at night and pass through the grate there, the door grate, past a bag with food and water to my father, and he will share that with them. And my mother would send me, because I was small, I was little, would send me with this bag, and I was going on my fours, after dark fell. And on one occasion, the militiamen came out as I had just finished handing my father the bag, and it was dark outside. There was no electricity, obviously, and I ran, and he heard the noise and said, "Stop, who is there?" And I pulled the trigger, and a shot went out, and my mother was freaking. When the shot rang, I was just reaching my mother on the other side of the fence. Then we ran. Apart from being arrested, he had to do works, useless tasks, as punishment.
From reading your book, I got the impression that as growing up in the village, that you were surrounded by a lot of family and relations.
Yes, I was sort of fascinated when I was a kid, growing up there by the life of the village. And I felt sort of protected, being in the midst of the extended family, so to speak. Apart from that, there was some sort of tradition of telling stories. So old people, men with moustache, with pipes, smoking pipes, they couldn't go to the fields to do work anymore, so every house had a bench outside the porch. So you would lean onto the house and sit on the bench. And these old people had an extremely formative role for kids, in a way, because, they start coughing, spitting, and smoking, and kids would gather and sit down on the dirt and listen to stories. I was actually fascinated by that. I lived a lot of time with my grandma, Saveta, who is mentioned a lot in the book, because she was only 5 or 6 houses up from us. So I spent after my grandpa died, her husband, I slept at her place many times in the same bed. And she would tell me stories, but then I was always waiting for the evening. Because what the peasant did, they went to visit the neighbor, the auntie, the brother, and they'll stay chatting for a while there, and they'll talk mainly, The men will drink, obviously, but women would not. So I'd go there, and they would start talking, and at a certain stage I would fall asleep next to her. But the stories, part of the stories will stay with me, okay? And they stayed with me until even now. So,
I was going to ask you, remember?
Oh, yes. Apart from the stories about other people and gossip and so on, they would tell me stories about ghosts, for example, soldiers' ghosts. And they will swear they will be real, you see. Or about dead people coming from the grave and making noises at home and things like that, no? Or about the devil. Yeah, he was big on stories. And about priests and wolves. Yeah, because we had a big forest between my village and neighboring villages, and the wolves were there, always with us, no? In particularly winter, you could see them sitting on the edge of the forest.
I presume most of a lot of the people in the village were like farmers.
They are peasants. That means their only means of sustenance was the land. So they would cultivate grain and maize, the corn, in other words.
Yeah.
Yes. Then barley, rye, then potatoes, carrots, tomatoes, everything. That's how they lived, really. They didn't have jobs. They lived if they cultivated properly their land. And as a young boy, my papa would take me with him to fertilize the land. How? He had oxen at the stage, and then he upgraded to horses later on. So I'm talking about that age, right? We are talking about 1940s, right? So the tradition was that men would drink for sorrow when they were sorrowful and when they were joyful, right? These were the primary occasions. I mean, it wasn't a type of socializing we have today. You meet a friend, oh, let's have a coffee, let's have a beer, let's have this. No, you had serious business there to do. When you were poor, you had a pain of some kind, you would drink with friends, right? And you'll tell them your pain, they tell you their pain, and the more they drank, they forgot about the pain. And then when joyful occasions, having a boy, it was the top.
The newborn boy will have to go much further, thought my father through his alcoholic fog, and get a real education. The circle of ignorance that has subjugated the family for centuries would have to be broken. Under the curious gaze of the neighbors, he instructed the older men of the family, my two grandfathers, to bring me one book each, an ABC and a grade 1 maths book, as well as a sum of money. Both named Teodor, but known in the village respectively as Teodora and Todierea, they placed the gifts on my body. To demonstrate the importance of the male lineage in the family, the sum given by the paternal grandfather had to be greater than that of the maternal grandfather.
My father was not good at school. So he always told me, right? But he valued education. Somehow his little experience, he was 26 or something, or 25 when I was born. But he had enough experience by then to realize that he would have done better if he paid more attention at school. But it wasn't all his fault. Drawing from his own experiences, no? My papa realized the value of education. Yeah. And perhaps also by going out of the village to work for a year or so in Bucharest. And he had a sort of a facility of communication with people. And he listened to people. And so that helped him. So when this thing came over him, the persecutions and the imprisonments and so on, both he and Mum lived for me. He used to tell me that education was my salvation, using these words, really. And he talked about books, being really deep in his thought, saying that books know more than people, that I should read them. But he added, if they tell the truth. He was really aware of what happened in communism, what happened to everything.
Yeah.
Because books were censored and you couldn't have a book for example, which presented ideas different from the one, their views, the communist views. So I often wonder how an uneducated man could come up with such a sort of comprehensive, deep thought, no?
Yeah.
He realized what went on. And I had to think over the years. Sentences would ring in my ears.
So you keep in touch a little bit with the Romanian, what's going on in Romania still?
Oh yes, I read the newspapers daily almost. Now I'm more into Italian newspapers because they have more things happening apart from the pandemic and other things political. But Romania has become a bit monotonous. Always the same things, corruption, spread corruption, which I know is there. One always looks for something different. It's part of a person's curiosity in a way. But in my case was the realization that I couldn't live in a place like Romania forever. I perhaps am a particular case because my parents were declared enemies of the people. And I was 4 or 5 years old when that happened. It started with my primary school when I discovered a new language, Russian. So they started teaching us Russian in grade 4. And here you are, I am the best in the class, right? We are not many, but I was the best. And then the teacher gave me praise. One of the rare occasions the teacher praised me. She wouldn't, because my father was an enemy of the people, you know. So I said, oh, this is nice. I am good at something. So the teacher praises me. Before that, she would always sort of humiliate me when she would have an occasion to do that. Yeah. Although I knew I was the best in the class. And she knew that. And she gave me the best marks, right? She put it on the cover, I remember, on the cover of her book. And now, so, oh, good, I can do, yeah, Russian. So I discovered other worlds, you see, through a language. I go home and I say, Papa, very happy. Today we learn Russian. And he doesn't say anything, just serious. I can write in Russian. And he said, okay, write. And I write Ada Doma. And unexpectedly, he didn't praise me. Just stood there and pondered and looked at me. Because he would always, praise me. Yes, good boy, that's the way to go. Things like that, no? When would come home with a good mark or happy, in a way. And then he started, I never heard him before, said, I'll give you an approximation of what he said. These bloody idiots, and I wouldn't go into more vulgarity, Russians, they ruined our country. They are the worst bloodsuckers in the world, and that's why I suffer, because of them. So yes, so I learned then from him a bit about the world. There are different worlds. Some are better, some are not so good. But Papa continued. He said, but listen to me. You learn Russian because who knows? But you should get good marks, but don't get too hooked on it, something like that. I realized then that languages, I had some attraction to languages, right? Yeah. I was a teacher in middle school, not the elementary, in middle school, in the school next to my village. So I was walking or going by bicycle to my job for a whole year. And I was a titular, so to speak, because although I didn't have a degree, because there was a shortage of teachers.
Okay.
Now, you must learn, in communism, they did this. In every profession, people who would not be showing that they were friendly towards communism, they were not communists, on the contrary, they spoke against, or something like that, they would be put aside. Some would be sacked, some would be just marginalized. Then shortages of professionals came about. There were shortages in every profession, obviously. And teaching was not better. So people like me, if a school gave them the job, actually it was at the province level. So if the province, through the school, gave you the job, even if you're unqualified, you'd keep the job for the whole year. Anyway, there wouldn't be anybody to substitute you. So the schools would choose people with matric, with good results, normally. You would get a job. We are talking about 1960s, right? Now, the situation has improved, obviously, and over the years it has improved. So I taught in grade 7 maths, in grade 5 to 7 French, and I think in grade 7 again, agricultural science. How about that? Peasant. I was born. So I tell you what, I had to hit the book there because I didn't know what to teach, but there was a manual, right?
Okay. I was going to ask, what did that consist of?
Well, working the fields, methods of working the fields, like plowing, like sowing and that sort of stuff. And also growing animals, keeping animals, looking after animals. But then, not being able to study economics, then I said, what can I do? I was afraid I had to go and do the military service. It was compulsory. So I said, let's do languages. By that time, I was fond of Italian, which I discovered on the pasture fields. I was there with our cow and calves, and my papa bought me a transistor radio operating on batteries. So I used to take this radio, which was a box, 30 centimeters per 20 or so, and with me everywhere. I would put it in a bag, which was virtually a net, a red net. It had to be red, communist, right? And carry it with me on the fields and listening to the radio in various languages from the neighborhood, Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary, and so on. And I discovered one day Italian, and I fell in love with that language, with the sound, actually. I remembered my grandpa was a prisoner in Italy, a war prisoner, First World War. Oh, right. Yes. But I was very little when he died. But my neighbor was also a prisoner with him in war. And one evening he heard me listening to this radio on the porch there outside. I wanted everybody to listen to Italian, right? Mm-hmm. I was sharing very generously with everybody, loud sound, which was allowed in the village. And he said, "Oh, you learn Italian, Teodor." I said, it is Italian then. Because I had doubts, you see. And he said, "Oh, yes." And he started teaching me words like caro, amore, buongiorno. He remembered these words and he would teach me. And then he said, "Oh, you pronounce them better than me." All right? And then he started talking to me about my grandpa's life. He knew a lot. And their adventures in Italy, where they went, what they did. And they are coming back from the war. And it was at the time that Transylvania was still under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was then, at the end of the war, in 1918 actually, Transylvania became part of Romania. Then I wanted to go to the university to study Italian. There were lists of enrollments you had to enroll, and I wanted to get into the university so I wouldn't go to do military service, which was compulsory. I realized that in Italian there were some 6 candidates per place, and in Tartar there were only 2. So daily I would consult the lists, and Tartar wouldn't grow, but Italian would, and French and Spanish and other languages would go up. Then I enrolled in Tartar for fear of being taken to the military. After the closure of the lists, Tartar had 10-11 students there, candidates for a place, and Italian had 7. So I was stuck. But I got in, and I managed after the first year to be transferred to Italian with great difficulties because the places were limited. But a good dean in the end accepted my application. But in the meantime, I would say that while doing Tartar, I was doing Italian, at some courses in Italian at the University of the People, where 2 of my future lecturers in the Italian department were teaching. They noticed me, and they also helped me to be transferred to Italian. So I was happy after that. But another good thing happened to me by transferring. One of my lecturers was an announcer, a speaker on the radio, official Radio International, Romania, Radio Bucharest International is called now, then Radio Bucharest, but the international section, right? Where they transmitted programs, mainly propaganda, in various languages, like English, obviously, French. And they had, as to English, they had a specific time only for Australia because of the wavelength, I don't know, whatever specific.
Who would be listening in Australia?
Yeah, well, here you are. I don't know. But that was how they operated. They wanted to spread this propaganda everywhere. So there were English, Yiddish, French, Portuguese, Spanish, all the major languages, right? And Russian, obviously, Russian. And so I started by reading the news. And it's a long story how they took me instead of others, because we were sent from the university, 5 of us, right? Mm-hmm. And I was in year 3, but there were year 5 students. So in the end, they selected me and another fellow from year 5, because the university was going over 5 years.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they're not 3 years or 4, right? Yeah. 5 years, that was the program. So in the end, they chose me, and the fellow whom they didn't choose got somehow a scholarship to Italy the next year. Then he asked for political asylum in Sweden, I remember. Yeah. So the thing is that I started working at the radio, and I was very well paid. So I worked 2 evenings per week. Then they increased it to 3, and I worked from 4 to 12 o'clock at night. We had to record everything on tape. You remember the big tapes? Yeah. And the tapes would be taken to 11th floor. I don't know, we were on 2nd floor or something. 11th floor, where the censors were. Mm-hmm. No? They had to look at the tape to see that everything was okay. And one of our section of Italian was always in charge. a trusted person, no? That I wouldn't say bad things, but everything was, we had to read word by word. We couldn't talk freely, we couldn't deviate from what was there. So I did this from late 67 until 71, 4 years. Okay. I did this, yes. And then in year 3, I met Ariella at a linguistic conference in Bucharest. Yeah. Again, Romance, languages, philology and linguistic conference was. And she came as a newly graduate and a participant at the conference. And I was sent by the university to attend to the request of these people. Then to be at the door and if they ask questions where to go, things like that. Okay. Or if they needed something, you know, to pass the word to the officials. Because I knew languages and other people from other sections, from English, from French and so on. For Spanish, I was chosen for Italian, right? And then, stroke of luck, I met the woman of my life. When Ariella and I were engaged, being her a foreigner, she couldn't practically go, we couldn't share the same environment, let alone having the same cabin in the mountain or having the same hotel room and so on. Not that we did it. In order to go over these obstacles, I knew I had to pay, and I did on a few occasions. And but I'll tell you another story about my relationship with Ariella. We were engaged, and Ariella and I decided to go to the Black Sea. It was summer. And we went to the National Tourism Office in Bucharest. And they said we had to book a hotel, to book things. Well, you can't, because she's a foreigner. So you can't get a room, not even 2 rooms if you are together. So we said, okay. So we went. And we found rooms were available, but they were given to you, particularly when they knew that they could exploit the situation. The owners knew, not the owners, the director there, because there were no owners. The state owned everything. No? But the man in charge there, or the woman in charge, some would become rich, all right, by doing this, because they would invent excuses also for Romanians. We don't have a room, but if you winked at him or at her and showed some money, things would be fixed. So we got our rooms there. Then we had a surprise when we went down to the restaurant. To the cafe. No, it was a restaurant of the hotel, because they accepted foreigners. When they accepted foreigners, that meant they intended to take better care of the environment, of the sheets, of everything, right? Yeah. Because foreigners brought in dollars, while the poor Romanians were worthless to them.
The Romanians couldn't really complain.
You complain, but they would say, okay, go ahead, complain to my boss, you see, and you wouldn't obtain any result. They were all a sort of a mafia. When it came to money, they split money among themselves. And yeah. But the hotel, restaurant. So we went there, and the waiter says, okay, because he checked some documents. He said, the lady is a foreigner. Now you go there, in that area, and you, Mr. Flonta, go here. So there was a pedestal, I remember, a big pedestal, and separated by a cord, a nice cord, blue. I remember the color, blue, from the other side of the bigger part of the restaurant. Okay. So I couldn't cross that line. I could hop over it, easily. And Ariella had to sit, but we are clever when we are young. Luckily, the table closest to the cord was free. So she went there. And luckily, on the other side, the table closest to the cord was free. And I sat on the other side. So she was looking down on me, right? Because she was on the pedestal. Isn't that an irony? In your own country, you are humiliated that way, right? Yeah. I mean, a foreigner comes, irrespective of who he or she was. You put the foreigner there on the pedestal, and so she ate quickly her lunch and took her plate with the cake and came down, sat with me. I was alone at the table, so I completed my meal, so we were on equal footing now. Long story with big events in it, Ariella and I, and then I managed to leave and start a new life in Italy. And as I said before, I learned there what freedom really was, but I also learned that you had to fend for yourself, and there was not much choice for me. While Ariella was in the system, she was Italian. I knew Italian, but many Italians knew Italian much better than me, so here I was, didn't have a profession, so to speak. And I tried a few things, didn't work, but in the end, if you sort of want something badly, hopefully you can achieve it. For me, it wasn't such a smooth transition, in the sense that I arrived in Milan. We lived with Ariella's mother. They lived together, only the two of them. Her other brother and sister were away. From the economic side, we were okay. But the women worked, and I didn't have a job, okay? And I felt that from the first week. My English is not so good because I started learning it at 30-odd years. Yeah.
Okay. So when did you start learning English in Italy?
No, here in South Australia.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So did you have any? I presume you had a little English when you arrived.
No, I didn't. Yeah, I could say good day or good morning, good something, but I did not know any English. When I arrived, I could read 5 Romance languages and managed to talk, to get my way through 4 actually of them.
Yeah.
But
because I should mention for people who don't know that Romanian is not related to the Slavic languages.
No. Many people said to me, it's a Slavic language. No. Romanian is a Romance language. That means, not romantic, means, as some people say, means Neo-Latin language. So why did we leave Italy? Well, Italy in the 70s wasn't in the best economic position. I personally couldn't find a good job. I did work all these years there, but I did what I could. And from humanistic education, I had to work in constructions, for example, but not physically, in the office. But anyway, we earned a decent living there, and Ariella had started working at the university at that stage, in a school at the university. And then an opportunity came for a position at Flinders University in Adelaide. So we went there, and it was for Ariella, actually. So she won and she was the chosen one, so to speak. And she taught into department departments in Italian and Spanish. And then I started working in the Italian department there and doing masters at the same time. And during that period of time, I saw an advertisement, actually not me, but my lecturer there, friend lecturer Italian, with whom I taught a course, the Italian for Beginners. So here they were looking at the University of Tasmania for sort of experienced Italian for Beginners tutor. So here, Ariella and I came along to Tasmania in 81 and stayed here for a year and a half almost. But every month I would go to the kids and wife to Adelaide. So my money was spent in this way, and here I was staying in college, and so that was it. And then in 83, Ariella joined me. I became the head of the department at the University of Tasmania. Section of Italian in the Department of Modern Languages, and Ariella, yes, the two of us were the department at one stage. Yeah. Yes, but with help from the Italian government, as for casual tutors and that sort of stuff. And I know that you are going to ask me about my impressions of Tasmania, so I'll tell you.
Well, I've asked everybody.
Certainly. So I had a beautiful impression while I was in the air, floating above the airport. For some reason, the aeroplane couldn't land immediately, so it took a few rides over the bay. And I said, oh my God, what a beautiful place. It looks like the fjords of Finland I saw on photographs and things like that. I said, oh, beautiful place. And the plane went down, and it was nice. Then we came down to the airport, and the airport was small then. And that made a bad impression. I said, oh.
Even smaller, some might say.
Yeah. So the airport didn't impress me. But it's nice now. And I arrive by bus in Sandy Bay, where the university is. And then I look on the right, I look on the left, and these buildings reminded me of Sergio Leone films, the Far West. I said, what is... You see, because in Europe, even in the villages there, you have houses made of bricks, solid. But it gave me an impression of such a flimsy thing, as if they were not going to stay there for long. You see.
Are you talking about the university building?
No. Before coming to the university, just in the center of Sandy Bay. Now it has evolved a bit, but I'm talking about 81. So there were all these white panels. I had this impression that they were temporary. Well, we had a bit of a problem, particularly Ariella and the kids, because, but not a real problem, but their perception more, no? That the Adelaide was more cosmopolitan. There are more Italians, and obviously we are surrounded by Italians. At the university was Italian, students were studying Italian, so when we came here, after a couple of weeks or so, when I couldn't accompany Ariella and the kids with the car, they would take the bus. And she was talking in Italian to them, right? And the kids, after a while, soon after, said, "Mom, don't talk to us in Italian anymore on the bus." And she said, "Why?" "Everybody's looking at us." So you embarrass us.
Self-conscious.
Self-conscious, yes. But every time I go through Tasmania, it's a discovery.
Yeah.
I learn to love the environment and the freedom you find. This landscape is made for freedom, if you can conceive it. or if you can conceive lack of freedom particularly. No?
So how did the offer from Australia sort of come about?
I found it in the newspaper, Corriere della Sera. I was interested in politics, and I read the newspapers and what happened in Italy daily and so on. So we used to live not far from San Siro, the soccer stadium. On the way back home from the news agency there, senior tutor in Italian, Flinders University, Australia. Well, I said to myself, what is this tutor meaning? Because tutor is like governance for kids, like kids minder, like in Italy and there. In our world, the tutor wasn't a university position, right? You would say assistant. So I came home and we looked at it, and the salary was bigger than Ariella's salary in 2 jobs, full-time in a school and part-time at the university, giving a course at the university in linguistics, structural linguistics. So she understood more about this tutorship, and she started jumping up and down. It was for her, right? Because they required experience with language laboratory. And Ariella came out only a month before or 2 from a 2-month-long course on how to teach languages with the language laboratory. Yeah. So, and she had experience at the university and in schools. She was a teacher, right? Yeah. I was not yet. And then she started jumping up and down. Let's go. But she said, I hate doing the documents and all that stuff, bureaucracy. I said, okay, you go, I'll do the documents and everything I look after that. And she said, yes. And I put together the documents. But then reality sank in. Her mother was alone there. But she was still able and agile and doing all the stuff a normal person does. And, she helped us a lot with the kids. But then this position at Flinders had become available because an Italian lady from Venezia, who lived on the Grand Canal there in a splendid house, had left Australia, had left the position after a year or something, 2 years perhaps. She just didn't fit here, she thought, no? Yeah. So why I know these things? Because the professor from Flinders University sent telegrams saying to Ariella, you go to Venice for an interview with this lady, and we'll take it from there. Because Ariella was the first on their short list. But they had 60 people applying, coming, because they were for 2 languages, Spanish and Italian, applying from South America, from Spain, from Italy, from everywhere. So I accompanied Ariella to Venice, and this lady, because they were Italians, she knew that Ariella would speak good Italian. She started speaking to Ariella in Spanish, which I also understand. And Ariella naturally just went into Spanish, and the lady said, let's stop doing this charade. You speak Spanish better than me. So they gave Ariella the job. But the big thing was that my boss didn't know anything about this. So many people from the office had taken the vacation, right? Because in August in Italy, everybody used to go on vacation. And then I told him that I'm going to Australia. And he looked at me, Australia? Are you stupid? No, I don't think so. And he said, what are you going to do there? I don't know. In the meantime, Ariella has a job And he said, "Oh, come on, Flonta, don't be silly. I'll double your pay." He was mean before that. "I'll double your pay." "Oh, thank you," I said, "for your offer. It's a bit too late." From there, it was a beautiful thing. The University of Flinders paid our travel for the boys also. Stefano was 4, and Francesco was 5. We didn't take too much extra luggage, but we did take some. Try to stay within the limits paid by the university here. Yeah. And then we had to toss, Ariella and me, for the hand luggage and for the suitcase, between pasta making machine and a big English Italian dictionary, right? And I think we made the right choice. We left the pasta machine at home, took the dictionary with us, and it stood us in good stead. Ariella knew a bit of English, but her English was Shakespearean English. So, yes, she studied Shakespeare at one stage in original. Yeah. And we came here. She didn't understand much. Yeah. And it came that after a few months I understood more Aussie language than she could understand. So we compensated each other, but it was a big experience. I'll tell you what, I started with all the heavy stuff on my brain that I had to restart again. Mm-hmm. It was the second time, after Italy. Yeah. I had to restart again here. So I took it as my last chance in a way. Yeah. That was weighing heavily on my brain all the time, on my mind all the time. And I think Adelaide was a good place for us to start. There were friendly people at the university there, more Italians who helped us, who came here as very poor migrants. Some of them paid from Australia. Some Italians from here paid for them, came on boats. Yeah. They were lovely people. We were, luxury immigrants, really, because we came to a job, and I thank God for that, because, you can afford to think differently. Yeah. Also, I worked and did a master's degree there, got this job here temporarily. Yeah. Then was renewed, and they actually put me in charge, and we moved here to Tasmania then in 83, in February. Yeah. 83, the kids came down, and Ariella also. Within not long distance of each other. And talking about family, you mentioned this, that people stay together more. And we are all here within not long distance of each other. And we have very good rapport with each other. I mean, with our grandkids and daughters-in-law, they are wonderful. And our children, every anniversary of every member of the family, we normally spend together. Yeah. And take trips together. We went to Deloraine and
I did see some pictures.
Just 2 weeks ago, and we had a lovely time. And guess what? The owner of the manor there learned that I was Romanian, and came to the room with a bottle of palinka from Romania, because he and his wife had visited Romania 2 years ago.
Wow.
And I look at the bottle and I read Bihor. Bihor is my county.
Ah, yeah.
But, have you been there in this county? Unfortunately not, he said. We've been to other parts, among them the Dracula's castle. Then I explained to him that I come from there, and I sent him my book, the PDF. And we have, as you know, a big family now here. I mean, big. Three Aussie members of my family are here now, the grandchildren. Yeah. So we're proud of that. And although all the other members of our family were born overseas, Stefano, my kids, Francesco and Stefano were born in Italy, Anna in Romania, and Rosalina in India. Yeah. So we're a multicultural family. But I'm glad you mentioned lockdown, because to make a comparison to what I lived when I was under communism, you see, that was total lack of freedom for us. And I think it's for the first time the whole world, and particularly the Western world I relate to daily now, no, has experienced such an extended, actually, lack of freedom imposed by the government. Okay? Now imagine to have a government which imposes on you and on your friends, on your family, on everything which moves, to live in cages. Yeah. That's what we live there. And here we can accept a lockdown for a month, for 3 months, or 6 months. We can accept it. We know that this will end. But there, you don't know.